A journalist in Tokyo was writing columns for a Nazi newspaper while slipping secrets to the Kremlin. A Catalan obsessed with war pretended to be a spy for the Reich from a modest apartment in London. A Serbian playboy moved between brothels and embassies, leaking information to the British and warning about an imminent attack in the Pacific. They wore no uniforms and never crossed trenches, but their actions weighed as much as an armored division. Richard Sorge, Juan Pujol Garbo, and Duško Popov were the invisible men of the Second World War. They acted in silence, operating among lies and risking their lives for a truth that at times nobody wanted to hear. One saved the Normandy landings with a masterful deception. Another tried to prevent Pearl Harbor, and the third watched as his ignored warning opened the gates of hell on the Eastern Front. This is the story of three spies who played with the fate of the world. Tokyo, 1930s. In the streets, tension boiled in an empire growing hungry for conquest. In its bars and newsrooms, among diplomats and soldiers, there moved a man with a limp, sharp eyes and a captivating smile. He was a correspondent for the Frankfurter Zeitung, a member of the Nazi Party, and confidant of the German ambassador in Japan. But all of this was a mask. His name was Richard Sorge, and he was spying for the Soviet Union.
Stalin was very interested in having spies in Japan because the Japanese military made it very clear that the Soviet Union was enemy number one.
Richard Sorge was born in 1895, the son of a German engineer and a Russian mother. In 1914, he volunteered to fight for Germany in the First World War. However, in one battle, a shell splinter shattered his right leg. It left him something deeper than a wound, a contempt for the nationalism that had pushed his country into disaster. Back in Berlin, he turned toward communism, and in 1919 he joined the Communist Party of Germany. His activism put him in the sights of the police, and so Moscow became both his escape and his new home. In the Soviet capital, he trained as an agent of the Comintern and later of the GRU, military intelligence. Sorge had a unique gift. He knew how to listen, keep quiet, and pretend masterfully. In 1930, he was sent to Shanghai, where he witnessed the Japanese invasion of Manchuria and the expansion of the Japanese Empire. From there, in 1933, he was assigned to his ultimate post, Japan. He settled in Tokyo under the cover of a German journalist. It was the perfect facade. In a system that hunted anyone with the potential to be a spy, no one suspected the limping correspondent who wrote for Nazi media and toasted with Axis officers.
In Japan, there was an extremely strong defense against spies. They never let the workers at the Soviet embassy out of their sight. The whole Russian colony was under constant surveillance. We needed information, and we needed it immediately. The only way out was to fall back on foreign agents that one didn't have to train. But Stalin did not trust foreigners.
Despite the constant suspicions of the Soviet leadership, Sorge's greatest success was earning the trust of the German ambassador, Eugen Ott. Ott considered him an intimate friend and not only let him into his inner circle, but often had him draft confidential reports for Berlin. The spy knew everything, and every piece of information he obtained he sent encrypted to Moscow. In 1934, he officially joined the National Socialist Party. That way, nobody doubted his loyalty. But while he drank with high-ranking officers of the Reich, he was building an espionage network under the codename Ramsey, inserting Soviet operatives at every level, from the Japanese government to the German embassy.
It is the bar of the Imperial Hotel in the immediate vicinity of the Imperial Palace, and it was the central meeting place for both the German community and others. In the end, the information that Sorge became so famous for procuring certainly came from German sources, but especially from government sources. It is actually an international meeting place, the various media representatives from around the globe meet there. Diplomats, business leaders, business representatives. It was the kind of place where you could gather relevant information, engage in harmless conversation, background talks.
Deep in the war, in 1941, Sorge's network achieved a crucial breakthrough. Germany was planning to break the non-aggression pact and invade the Soviet Union. He urgently transmitted the message to Moscow, stating that the Wehrmacht would cross the border on June 20th. However, Stalin, stubborn in his own reading of the situation, dismissed it outright.
The information was only as good as it was useful, and the Soviet intelligence agencies were very, very weak in this sense, because they performed almost no analysis. Instead, the information was simply reported directly to the top.
Stalin receives corroborating reports from other spies, but he does not believe that Hitler will open a war on two fronts and disregards all of the warnings.
Finally, on June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. Sorge had been off by only 2 days. Millions of German soldiers crossed east and the Soviet Union went up in flames. But Sorge did more than predict the invasion. In October of that same year, he reported that Japan would not open a second front in Siberia despite its pact with Germany. This allowed Stalin to transfer entire divisions from the Far East to the Western Front. Those troops held the line at Moscow and prevented collapse in the worst winter of the war. That piece of information saved the Soviet Union, and it was then that, with the satisfaction of duty fulfilled, Sorge fell.
Shortly before his arrest, he believed he had accomplished his mission in Tokyo. He had reported the most important things: the German attack on the Soviet Union, and that the Japanese would not attack the Soviet Union. And he had asked to be recalled because the last decade in which he had been a spy was so stressful that he simply needed peace and quiet.
The Kempeitai, the feared Japanese military police, arrested him on October 18, 1941. During interrogation, he confessed, not out of weakness, but out of calculation. He offered the Japanese a complete report of his activities, convinced that they could trade him to Moscow for prisoners of war. But he was wrong. Stalin refused to acknowledge him. To the Kremlin, Sorge was a ghost, and ghosts are already dead. Thus, Sorge spent 3 years in prison. He never renounced his cause. He never betrayed his network. And on November 7, 1944, he was hanged.
Я готов.
Richard Sorge was buried without a name in a mass grave at Sugamo prison, forgotten by those who had sent him. Recognition came only in the 1960s when Moscow finally declared him a hero of the motherland. Winston Churchill would later say he had been the greatest spy of the Second World War. He may never have received a medal or a triumphant welcome, but from the shadows, he made empires tremble. Juan Pujol Garcia was better known as the man who ended up fooling the Third Reich with a spy network that never existed. He did not fire a single shot in the Second World War, but his talent for deception saved thousands of lives in Normandy. His code name was Garbo, and his greatest performance was making Hitler believe the Allied hell was coming from somewhere else. Juan Pujol Garcia was neither a spy nor a soldier. He did not even speak English. But in 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, something changed in him. He had fought in the Spanish Civil War, first with the Republicans and later with the Francoists, and he came away disillusioned with both sides. He hated extremes, totalitarianism, and brutality. That is why, when Nazism rose over Europe, he felt he had to do something, not for a homeland, but for his principles.
Bueno, yo creo que él está muy influido por su experiencia en la Guerra Civil Española. Es una experiencia que le marca. Él tiene un sentido muy pacifista de lo que es la experiencia que estaba vital que estaba viviendo en ese momento. y es por ello que bueno, pues se dedica su misión y su objetivo en la vida en aras de la defensa de la democracia. Yo creo que esa es la idea o el ideal que le hizo tener éxito.
Pujol Garcia tried to offer his services to British intelligence, but they rejected him. A Spaniard with no training, no contacts, and no English was useless. Or so they believed. He did not give up. By his own means, he decided to infiltrate the enemy camp alone. He tricked the Abwehr, Nazi intelligence, into believing he was a fervent supporter of the Reich. Then he offered to work for them as a spy from Lisbon. He invented contacts, forged documents, staged military movements, and created an imaginary network of 27 agents who supposedly sent him reports from all over Europe. Each one had a story, a style, a zone of operations, but in reality, none of them existed.
Es capaz de inventar una historia de cada uno de estos personajes, desde un marinero venezolano que estaba operando en uno de los puertos ingleses, cada uno con su propia personalidad, cada uno con su propia historia.
The Germans adored him. They called him Alaric, while they named his network Arabelle. They sent him money, instructions, codes. He answered with plausible information, carefully crafted. Sometimes accurate, sometimes useless, but always convincing. His greatest talent was storytelling. He did not tell the enemy what they wanted. He told them exactly what they expected to hear. Eventually, the British MI5, which had been watching him cautiously, decided to recruit him. They brought him to London in 1942 and gave him a new code name, Garbo. His acting skills, strategic mind, and dedication to the useful lie made him a unique asset. From the British capital, he began to send massive disinformation to the Nazis, and they never suspected a thing.
Había aspectos de su caso que el propio Garbo no conocía o no entendía. Por ejemplo, sus mensajes fueron usados para descifrar el sistema de encriptado alemán. Sus mensajes eran transmitidos de Madrid a Berlín a través de una máquina de cifrado Enigma. Y como los británicos ya tenían el texto del mensaje original, podían reconstruir el código de cifrado.
However, his masterpiece came in 1944. The greatest amphibious military operation in history was being planned, the Normandy landings. The Allies knew that the key to success was deception, and that is where Garbo came in. His task was to convince Hitler that the invasion would not be in Normandy, but at the Pas de Calais, almost 300 kilometers away. Garbo sent reports, supposed intercepted conversations, even false letters that seemed to leak the plan, and the Führer took the bait.
Era el momento en el que la primera división SS Panzer, que estaba estacionada en la frontera entre Francia y Bélgica esperando un ataque en el paso de Calais, empezó a moverse. La habían desplegado para contraatacar en Normandía. Habría sido un desastre para los aliados. Pero les llegó un mensaje del cuartel general de Hitler para que regresaran con los tanques a donde se encontraban hasta el momento del paso de Calais.
Even when Allied troops were already landing on the Norman beaches on June 6, 1944, the Germans continued to believe it was a diversion. Hitler held his most powerful divisions away from the real front for weeks, waiting for an attack that would never come. That confusion proved decisive because it allowed the Allies to consolidate their positions, advance inland, and liberate France.
Fue una de las grandes campañas de manipulación de todos los tiempos, ya que generó un elemento de sorpresa en torno al desembarco que permitió establecer la cabeza de puente en Normandía. Probablemente sea el mejor ejemplo de la operación de engaño estratégico más exitosa de toda la guerra.
When the war ended, Garbo was a ghost. The Nazis had decorated him. The British had protected him. No one knew his real name. Many believed he was dead, and that suited him. He faked his death in Angola and went into exile in Venezuela. He lived humbly, in anonymity, far from the spotlight and the history books. Only in the 1980s did his story come to light. He was decorated by the United Kingdom and visited Normandy, where veterans thanked him for saving their lives. Pujol wept. He was not a traditional hero. He had never charged with a rifle or commanded battalions, but his weapon was the word, and his battlefield was the enemy's mind. On October 10th, 1988, he died in Caracas at the age of 74. Nevertheless, his legacy lives on in intelligence manuals and in every account of the greatest hoax ever staged in a real war.
Su tumba está en Choroní frente a las playas idílicas del Caribe venezolano, en las que paseaba como un hombre anónimo y cerca del pequeño hotel que creó allí, donde ya hay una placa que dice: aquí estuvo el mayor espía de la historia.
Duško Popov wore impeccable suits, wagered scandalous sums in casinos, and collected lovers as easily as he changed passports. On the surface, he was a charming, wealthy, frivolous man, but beneath that facade was one of the most effective and daring spies of the 20th century, and the world would come to know him by his nickname, Tricycle. The Nazis thought he worked for them. The British knew he was their man, and Yugoslavia also received his reports. Triple agent, triple life, and perhaps a warning that could have changed history. He was born in Serbia in 1912, into a well-to-do family. He studied law in Europe, mastered several languages, and soon became a familiar figure in the diplomatic and social circles of the continent. His charisma was irresistible. He was recruited by the Abwehr, the intelligence service of the Third Reich. The Germans considered him a valuable asset and gave him the codename Ivan. But they did not know that Popov, from the very beginning, despised everything Nazism stood for. Before accepting any German mission, he approached the British at MI5. His offer was to work as a double agent, and London accepted.
As Duško got more and more confident, and as he began to win the confidence of his German handlers, they were more and more interested in using him more extensively. And they decided that they would send him to London, where they had a very small network of spies, but they thought somebody like Duško could build up a larger network. And the first process in that was a stop-off in Lisbon.
From then on, Popov became a key piece in the Allied disinformation system. With carefully filtered information, he fed the Germans false data about military plans, troop movements, and British weaponry. At the same time, he passed vital details to MI5 and collaborated with the Yugoslav secret services. All this while maintaining a public life of luxury, women, alcohol, and fast living. It was the perfect cover. Nobody imagines a spy winning fortunes at roulette or slipping out of a party with a Swedish actress on his arm. But his most important moment came in 1941. The Abwehr assigned him a mission in the United States. He was to establish contacts and send an encrypted questionnaire, apparently of Japanese origin, with questions about American military installations in Hawaii.
Germans decided to send me to the United States to organize similar spy nets. And they have given me a lot of questionnaires, the position of the ships, where they are harbored, the oil field, oil reserves, ammunition depots, and everything, objects for immediate bombing, and all centered on Pearl Harbor.
Popov understood the gravity of the document. He traveled to New York with the message and immediately requested a meeting with the FBI. He presented himself to its director, J. Edgar Hoover, with all the information, the names, and the warnings. But Hoover did not believe him. He distrusted Popov's lifestyle, considered him frivolous and unworthy of a true patriot. According to some accounts, more than the papers, what really shocked him was the way Popov talked about women. And so the head of the FBI ignored the warning.
Hoover told him to leave his office, but Popov refused. He lit a cigarette and began a spirited defense of his position, describing the microdot questionnaire, and warned him of the plot to attack Pearl Harbor. Hoover accused him of being a German agent, saying, "You're begging for information to sell to your German friends so you can make money and be a playboy."
Less than 4 months later, on December 7th, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. More than 2,400 Americans were killed. And Duško Popov, the spy who might have prevented the tragedy, became a voice drowned out by the pride and blindness of the powerful. Popov remained active until the end of the war. His reports helped mislead the Nazis and protect key Allied operations. And although he was never a public figure, his eccentric lifestyle did not go unnoticed. Popov did not boast about his exploits. He lived without seeking recognition, without published memoirs, and without medals on his lapel. He died in 1981 on the French Riviera, far from the noise and the secrets that had once shaped the greatest war in history. They did not win medals or command armies, but without them, many battles might have been lost. Sorge, Garbo, and Popov fought in the most silent and dangerous war of all, the war of deception. They operated among lies, codes, and betrayals, and when they spoke, the fate of the world depended on someone listening. They did not always succeed, but when they did, they changed history. Thus we come to the end. If you like this video, we'll be waiting for you in our next installment of War Documents.